IDW Sonic Annual 2024. It starts with someone in a vehicle saying the brakes are out, and I'm just wondering why they conveniently broke just to give Sergeant Kid a chance to save the day to make themselves look good. I'm also wondering why they were even on a bus in the first place. I don't even know why the story happens. It just starts out in Meteor Reds, which is unusually good pacing for this comic. I love Surge's dialogue here, not taking things seriously and appreciating speed. When she's not wasting time trying to kill characters with plot armor, she's as lovable as she was in her first issues again. She tells Kid to grab the runaway city bus with its hydro coils, which she still doesn't call by their official name. Never understood why they're called coils instead of tails in the first place. For some reason he ends up failing. It's just ice, it's not adamantium diamond. If Kid was really smart, you'd think he'd have anticipated this. And there's some chow in the way of the vehicle. Inconveniently. What are they doing outside of somebody's house or a chow garden? So again, this is just to have the plot go a certain way. So Serge has no choice but to attack the bus, and Kid stops it successfully this time. Someone points out that he broke its wrist because of her, and not the bus being broken. And you'd think someone would lampshade that it was either she did that, or some chow got run over that were inexplicably there. Serge insists that they could have jumped and saved themselves. Nobody points out that they thought they would have died if they jumped out, because the bus was going so fast and they would have landed on the hard road. And thankfully, someone thanks her in no time, so this didn't drag on too long, and explains away that they were all just rattled. She's told she's no Sonic and looks mad. It's realistic that this would happen. I'm just glad I didn't have her lash out because of it when she already threatened him and got away with it. That's convenient. Then it cuts ahead to her being in her bedroom, which has some cool moody curtains. So she's in a good enough position that she found some curtains to give her room some life of its own. It's like to reflect her. It sure is pointless that IDW Freedom HQ got destroyed if in the very next issue canonically it's already been rebuilt. She's throwing some toy that looks like a Sonic spin dashing. Again, I feel like if the writer really cared about these characters, we would have been shown her buying these things. I just find them so interesting, and I don't know why we're not seeing any of their progress. Kid wonders if she's okay and takes it personally that he's annoying her. When it's her fault she's not telling him what's wrong right away, which she did the previous times. In her own way, it is heartwarming that she even minds that he's upset, because it means that she cares, instead of actually enjoying it. I like that the story got away with having her say the line that he's annoying the crap out of her. That is realistically how she would talk, but that's as far as it can go. Eventually, she starts explaining what's bothering her. She wouldn't actually say the word Starline was right, when she hates him so much. She must be feeling crazy insecure about him not praising her enough to say this, when she's usually the opposite of level-headed. A lot of times passed since then, though. She's saying this because she's feeling bad about not thinking of another solution to save them, which is just her being insecure because it's being unfair. What else was she supposed to do? She doesn't know where any ropes are, and I'm pretty sure ropes would also be broken by the sheer momentum of a bus crashing into it. Out of nowhere, she says Starline was right about the Sonic cycle and how Sonic keeps letting villains go in the comic. But the only time he ever let a villain go in the games was letting Eggman go after the boss fights with them, not the final boss. I mean, he didn't stop the Eggmobile from flying away after he beat him in Sonic 1 until the very last minute. And it's not like the Eggmobile looks smaller, so it's not like it was in the background. It just arbitrarily becomes invincible so that he can't stop it. But it looks the same both times. It's just so much simpler to assume that in canon, Sonic just let the Eggmobile fly away because the story doesn't want Sonic to have stopped him from leaving. Then the rest of the boss fights wouldn't have been able to happen, so he let him go so that he could fight with him some more. Why is she saying this in the first place? The first half of the story did absolutely nothing to cause her to talk like this. Sonic has nothing to do with this story. Eggman has nothing to do with this story. No villain that Sonic let go has anything to do with this story. But then she reaffirms her character development, saying that they're not bad people, so she can't get mad at a world for being inept. I don't think it's in character for Surge to say inept. That sounds too formal. And they weren't inept in Sonic Forces. They joined a militia to fight Eggman, but that was the past. They're not fighting a war against Eggman anymore. Most people, they could grab a Wisp-On and fight Eggman anytime they want, but most people have to work for a living. That's why people even take it seriously at all that the heroes are being heroes. Because most people clearly don't do it for a hobby. It's not them being inept, they're just scared. Every time a character says something like this in the comic, they're wrong. The problem is, no one is written to be there to explain that they are wrong. Which implies that we're supposed to agree with her. Kid asks out of nowhere, what about Sonic and Tails? When he shouldn't really risk asking that, because her holding herself back from bothering them is why her life hasn't been ruined. Also, he shouldn't be asking this because he has no reason to think she's changed her mind about wanting to kill Sonic and Tails. She redundantly reiterates that she'll kill Sonic the first chance she gets, and I'm wondering why I'm expected to believe she isn't kidding herself. Again, she could have electrocuted him to death in one touch a long time ago. She says, maybe I don't bother, which she'd only be able to say if her brainwashing wore off over time, like Rouge's did. So she's still changed. She doesn't know if she wants Tails gone. So if she doesn't know if she wants Tails gone, then that would apply to the rest of Sonic's friends too. So that's why she doesn't secretly try to kill them, and just hide their bodies thinking no one would know. Like, she was specifically brainwashed to hate Sonic in particular, so it wouldn't apply to them. And for no reason, Kid calls Tails the liar when it was Sonic he accused of lying. So he would have hated him above all else. This would only come from him figuring out that Tails was only saying he'd become his friend in issue 50 to manipulate him to help him. And that makes sense to someone cynical who doesn't know Tails well to believe, because he did just try to kill Tails. Why would Tails actually want to be friends with him after that? It's easy to understand why he'd think Tails was only saying that so he'd help him. Tails never actually got to know him as a person, and he's cynical, so he wouldn't understand why he would still care about him. Without him explaining himself, this seems forced. The story shouldn't need me to think up a possible headcanon for why he still hates Tails after he was nothing but nice to Kit, treating him with kid gloves like he was a little baby bird. And I guess that's why he hates him, because Starline was also nice to him. I just hate how simplistic what he's saying is. It's nice to see her pet his head again. She says that she's gonna fight Eggman, and even says she'll love the civilians for loving her, which is better than nothing. Kit's smart enough to realize that if Eggman dies, Surge won't have an excuse to save people from him, and then nobody would be praising her. It's still forced because this very story had the things Surge had to save people from have nothing to do with Eggman. Where is he even getting this from? He should explain that most of the time there will be no reason to save people once all of the badness are defeated. He should explain that it's a miracle she even got to save people in this issue. Impressively, he also figures out she actually wants to help people. Which is impressive because that'd be out of character for the Surge we knew, and only makes sense if this was coming from the Surge pre-brainwashing. I like the idea that she joined Starline because he said she would get to be a hero if she did that. Kid figures out that if he goes out of his way to make peril for her to overcome, she'll get to be praised. I don't know why his dialogue's being written so formally, like he's trying to talk like Starline. What's with the word peril there? He literally is being written like Miles, if he had been written to be brainwashed to be loyal to Scourge. I was just thinking in the first page that they could get opportunities to be heroes by making the danger. But I would expect the impulsive, reckless one to come up with a risky idea like this, which would get them in huge trouble if people found out about this. Sure, he's just a kid, but all of his ideas before this came from him being a smart, cautious person. At least the fact that it's only his idea means that maybe she wouldn't get in trouble too, since people are already inclined to think the best of her while he's being ignored. I assume because she's older than him and is talking and has the showy electric powers. The best result I can hope for from this is that she catches them trying to do it and scares the living daylights out of them to get him to stop. That's all the drama this needs. Instead, I bet he's gonna try this 3 times, and somehow only then will she find out it's him. And I can imagine that everyone's gonna see her yelling at him. And some people are gonna be written to think, oh, you're obviously in on it, even though you're clearly against him. This is clearly just acting. Leave it to Flynn to make the story immediately foreshadow doom and gloom for these two to screw over the other writer's concept just because it's not his, and he first introduced them as people to fight Sonic. At this point, I'm just relieved he didn't immediately have them be villains again. If Kid ends up being hated and arrested for a long time because of this, that's pretty mean-spirited when he could have easily not written this at all. Flynn just sees Kid as disposable. It's just like how Sonic childishly thinks, always believing everyone has free will, even if they don't. The only reason Kit would not tell Surge about his plan is if he knew she wouldn't want him to do it. So he's doing his usual thing of going against her wishes trying to help her. But every other time he did that, he wasn't being completely stupid. The next story starts out with Knuckles in front of the Master Emerald with no conflict in sight. Oh, this is gonna be boring. It's nothing but narration from him about what we already know about his life. The Master Emerald shows him his friends, implying that it wants him to guard it while it's shrunken down and he's not on the island, but why would it not show him what they're going through? Of course he didn't decide to go to them. All of this is boring. Eventually Knuckles' thoughts reveal that he's glad he has friends and conveniently ignores that he's not spending any time with them, so he might as well be friendless right now. If he can think this, why isn't he with them? He tells the Master Emerald that he owes everything he has to it. And Sonic's sitting on the emerald and teases him, pointing out subtly that he owes everything to him too. But Sonic's too annoying for him to admit that, so they argue until their other friends stop them. It would have been nice if Sonic was actually Sonic here instead of teasing him with a smug smile like he never actually does in the games. It turns out his friends came here just to visit him so he wouldn't get too lonely. And it was Sonic's idea. Why would it be Sonic's idea when he thinks it's okay to do this? It's like he's only making an excuse so he can go and tease him. Knuckles' reaction makes it clear that they never did this before, because we never saw it happen in the games before. So they were never good enough friends with him to visit him on his birthday or Christmas. They always expected him to go to them. Just because something never happened in the games before on screen doesn't mean it never happened. Sonic never ate broccoli before. It turns out their plane got damaged on the way here, and I'm just thinking that seeing how that happened would be more interesting than the story, which really shouldn't have been so long. The story is just the result of not following the rule of, is this the most interesting day in the character's life? Then the story should be based around that instead. In the next story, I see Lanolin still stuck in permanent I hate you sneer mode. And this time it's because she's annoyed at Tangle's impatience. It turns out Mimic's spying on them, and he tries to reveal his backstory to the audience in a way that's too subtle and dialogue heavy. He saw a celebrity and thought he'd get him to like him by looking like him for literally no reason. There must be something wrong with him, besides what we already knew. Then the building got ruined by Eggman, and he somehow thought that shattered his future in the arts, and not himself having no social skills at all. He wanted to be noticed and belong, apparently, but did nothing but betray every freedom fighter group. So he didn't want to be noticed and belong. then he wastes my time waxing philosophical about how everyone is supposedly pretending and it's not just him projecting. And he thinks that everyone does stuff to cover up their emptiness. Since when has he thought like this? 2 whole stories, a boring waste of time. At least it's interesting to see when he met Whisper. He really remembers the names of anyone, except Whisper's old team, even though they're not the only team he had killed. That's not confusing at all. It's like issue 50 with the comic only running on meta logic. Nothing to say about the rest, just a waste of time. He remembers that he liked freedom fighting. Why is the story trying to make him sympathetic? It's not going to do anything with it, and it shouldn't. The math speech is so forced. He explains that he knew he couldn't be himself around people who don't know he's a traitor, and their friendship didn't feel good. He had no reason to think they were just manipulating him and can't be trusted. He tries to kill Whisper, but when Sonic shows up, he knows better. That was such a waste of time that wasn't worth describing what happened in. The first story was by Ian Flynn, so I immediately knew I'd be in for some trouble with him writing Surgeon Kid again. Of course he starts foreshadowing that the other writer's direction for them won't get to last because it wasn't his original idea for them. Even though it's completely out of character for Kid to make a reckless plan that he'd know wouldn't be worth the risk after the slightest of thought put into it. When a character defined by his cautiousness isn't reckless. Like every single time he nagged Surge, it was because he thought things through. It's instantly obvious that if he gets caught making peril, then even if people didn't refuse to believe that Surge knew nothing about his plan and hate her, he won't be able to be seen in public helping Surge anymore because it'd reflect badly on her if she didn't try to arrest him. Even Surge isn't so stupid that she wouldn't think of this and tell him off. She's the same person who thought her luck was so bad that she wouldn't get away with killing Clutch when alone with him. It was also jarring that he said make peril as if he ever talked like that before. Why does he have nearly every villain he writes talk in the same formal way like Penders? And it's never a character for a nervous doormat to smirk. Both writers just have Kid go through the motions because the comic's written in meta-logic, and meta-logic says he's a bad guy because of protagonist-centered morality at this point, that's all. Just because they hate Sonic. Rather than anyone actually caring what the characters would do based on how they act most of the time. The story has it out for both of these kids. It has Surge sort of screw up saving people, though she clearly did what she had to do and deaths would have been caused if she didn't do that. So it doesn't even work for trying to tell a story that she's always gonna suck at being a hero because she's too reckless. Because Sonic would have done the same thing. There was no other way to stop the bus from driving into something. You're not gonna tell me he would have let those Chow get hit by it. And she got really unlucky just happening to save someone who had the guts to call her out on her method of saving his life when there was clearly no other way to save him and she has electricity powers. It's not like he offered any suggestions. What did he expect her to do? My only hope is that Evan Stanley is the main writer of this comic nowadays, so she might not go through with Kit ruining his own life at best, and her reputation at worst. Like we'd want to see people never show gratitude for Surge saving them, so she'd go back to doing nothing but wasting her time trying to kill the heroes. That's creative and subversive. All it takes for this to be fine is for Surge to track down and find Kid alone after he makes peril and tell him not to do it again. But I'm grateful that Surge didn't get written to hurt anyone on purpose and still has admirers after this, so it didn't get as sadistic as it could've. Knuckles has a temper too, so it's not out of the question that people would be able to forgive her temper. Oh yeah, Knuckles would have done the same thing as her too. The second story by Iasmin was just recap about the fact that Knuckles got all of his friends because of the Master Emerald. And it was insanely boring because I know all of this already. And anyone reading this comic would. And that's almost all the story consists of. This was the laziest story ever. It was heartwarming that Sonic and his friends went to visit Knuckles, but the story ended before it could have an actual plot by showing what that would be like. The only reason someone would like this story would be if they're extremely easily impressed by a story just because it's got nothing but game characters and settings and references to the games with no creativity at all. Nothing to justify its existence. I like the idea of Knuckles looking back on how he got his friends and appreciating the reason he has them, but it didn't need to last this many pages and be the whole story. If I wanted to read a story that did nothing but recap Knuckles' life, there's more interesting options out there. Even Penders did that. Anyone who isn't already aware of Knuckles' life would not care about the story anyway, since it doesn't give you a reason to care about him, since he doesn't do anything. A non-fan exposed to this would just be distracted wondering why Knuckles is the guardian of this emerald in the first place, and thus not be invested in the story at any point. The story had no effort at all, probably could have just been written by reading a wiki page about Knuckles. And any fanfiction writer could have thought of this, and would have done better because it tells us what was done and said for all of the visit. It also gets Sonic's character better. Instead of him just interacting with him in an obnoxious, teasing way with a smirk that doesn't have any empathy for him at all, that doesn't come off like they're friends, and makes you feel sorry for Knuckles for having to put up with the main hero of the series. When in Sonic Heroes, Sonic treated Knuckles with respect. That's something game purists wouldn't notice about this since they'd be too busy liking how it does nothing but merely reference the games. Which they hate when Flynn does it, but not this story. Then it's not seen for what it really is. A phoned-in bunch of padding. Which just shows why a good idea can make a bad story if stretched on too long with nothing but that in it. Because some ideas aren't meant to carry entire stories. The final story by Giga D, the writer of that Dark Sonic fan comic I talked about, had the premise of Mimic hiding behind Whisper and deciding to remember his life instead of simply killing her right away when he even considered trying to go up to her when he'd be outnumbered in the first place. I have to assume that the only reason he took too long to try to kill her was that despite his air of confidence, he was actually well aware of how likely it'd be that he'd get outrun and dogpiled by those two, and was too scared to do it right away. But the point of the story is to give Mimic some unnecessary extra backstory instead of the characters with a completely mysterious past, who had an entire miniseries whose only appeal was that past. It at least cared enough to hint at Mimic's backstory, which normally would be impressive, but failed to be worthwhile because it's not believable they decided to stop trying to be an actor just because Eggman attacked the studio he was at and he was handed the idiot ball. Like they wouldn't just postpone the acting performance he had to do until after the studio was rebuilt. Or they found another studio. It makes Whisper's team's death less special because apparently he had plenty of other teams killed with only the vague excuse of saving himself with no actual explanation for why he had to do that to save himself according to his logic. He can turn into anything. Why does he think he needs to save himself? So he has a badge for this apparently. Everyone thought he did believe in the cause until the very last second because Eggman had almost completely taken over the world at that point. Why did he work with Whisper's team for so long? And it randomly tried to make Mimic sympathetic with edgy, melodramatic dialogue that his friendship with Whisper's team hurts so bad and Eggman's routine robot attacks are bad for your psyche. Which is just making an excuse since it's not bad for Tangle's psyche. How is that day any different than the average day on his planet? Like Eggman never attacked with robots out of sadism before he took over the world. Why did we get given irrelevant details on this unlikable character's backstory? As if we were remotely invested in him at all. The fact that it's about him and not these two entire characters who used to be completely different people. It just feels like an insult.